All right, we had that survey about what type of content you guys as viewers would like to see, and the response was overwhelming in favor of opening course updates as well as member game reviews and middle game plans. So all that's packaged into one here. We're going to look at Yasith playing the black pieces against MTL playing white. Yasith is a ChessGoals member, and I love showing off some games from ChessGoals members too. So here we have a Caro-Kann, and we see the exchange variation. And Yasith is following the ChessGoals Caro-Kann repertoire. Gets the bishop outside of the pawn chain before playing e6. And if you're watching this video and you want a very instructional guide on the exchange variation, look at yesterday's video that JD did as well. It's a really good one. So after bishop to b5, we see e6. This is all part of the repertoire. And now here, there's already a small mistake by white castling. And the best move for black here, and what our repertoire recommends, is bishop to d6. So the nice thing with bishop to d6 is you get the bishop out first and then play knight to e7 with a long-term plan of castle, f6, e5, and you just build this really big center. And you also have the backup plan still, if you want it, of going for a minority attack, a6, b5, b4, attacking over here on the queen side. So the reason that white made a mistake here with castling is because of this weakness on d4 and the knight on c3. There's no easy way to play pawn to c3. But now let's just see what happens in the game. So knight e7, h3, and now what I like about this game is even though Yasith is probably slightly out of book here, he is playing with the principles that are taught in the ChessGoals Caro-Kann course. So we see the weakest pawn on the board is this pawn on d4. It's attacked once by this knight on c6, and currently the knight is pinned, but the other knight is also going to attack this pawn on d4. So black is going to have two knights ready to attack d4, and then maybe he could bring in a bishop or queen later and keep piling up on this weak pawn in the center. So here we see knight f5, bishop takes c6 check, b takes c6. Now let's take note of the imbalances here. White has an advantage in terms of king safety. They got their king castled more quickly, but we know that this king will get castled in just a couple of moves. So that's not too big of a deal. We're going to get castled soon. In terms of pawn structure, though, black has an advantage with an extra center pawn. So we have two center pawns to one. And we also have this idea of pawn to c5. So advantage black with the pawn structure. In terms of the rooks, I kind of like the black rook on b8, pressuring this pawn on b2. And in terms of the knights, I think our knight sits a little bit better because it attacks a weakness. The c3 knight is sort of being blocked by our pawns. And I think our bishop is a little bit better because our bishop's on dark squares and all these pawns are on light. This bishop is on a dark square, which is the same color as this pawn. So technically that's going to be a bad bishop. So now bishop e3 was played in the game. Bishop to e7. And after a4, we see queen to b6. Already we can feel this pressure coming against white. Pawn on b2 attacked, pawn on d4 double attacked. Rook a to b1. Now here, this is a tough decision. Yasith played knight takes d4, and Lee Chess is pretty strict in calling this a blunder. But I think the reason why is because of this immediate queen to g4. It's a tactic, hitting this pawn and double attacking the knight. So it's allowing white to get a little bit of play, and maybe you could even say the initiative here. Black's going to have to defend a bit, and this is about equal according to the engine. What we can do here, instead of taking d4 right away, we can slow play this a bit. Because we know we have all the imbalance advantages here that we discussed, once we get castled, we can just slowly play with the advantages. So let's check out some stockfish lines. Castling is the tied for the best move. And now let's give white a logical move, rook to d1. Now stockfish says queen to b4, followed by bishop to f6 next. So you can see what we're doing here. We're slowly improving all of our pieces. The rooks can come into the game soon, like rook to b8, rook to c8, triple attack on this pawn. And if white has to make a committal move like g4, that's going to be a long-term kingside weakness for white. Now, going back to the game, knight takes d4. I think Lichess is a little bit harsh on this move. It's a good practical decision still. White plays what I think most club players are going to play. Bishop takes d4, just simplifying with this trade. After queen takes d4, though, it's already a 4-pawn advantage according to Stockfish. So really nice start for the game. And even though we're only up 1 pawn, we have a 4-pawn eval. Now, what I want to show next is just a nice example of how to win a Caro-Kann endgame when you're already up 1 pawn. So let's just see how smooth this game goes, because I really like how Yasith played this. So rook d1 retreats the queen. So there's a couple moves here where black is regrouping, which is completely fine. Now we see all of these pawns on light squares do leave potential weaknesses on the dark squares, but black has a dark square bishop and white does not have a dark square bishop. So this is not going to be a problem for black. So here we see rook to b4. Inaccuracy according to the engine, but it's getting the rook active, right? We're getting this rook ready to swing into the action. It's the only half open file for black, the b file. So now here we start to see playing for the initiative, making white react, and white makes a poor choice. So when you give your opponent multiple options, that's when they can tend to make mistakes, right? So here, white did not want to retreat this knight somewhere passively. White plays g3, and black capitalizes, bishop takes f4, ruining this pawn structure. These pawns are really ugly now, and it makes this rook b4 move even better. Like now we already have the f-pawn attacked. Brings in the queen to help. After rook e5, kicks the rook out, and rook takes f4. So there goes another pawn. Now we're looking at a 2-pawn advantage for black. Black has only lost the b pawn. All other 7 pawns remain. And look at this finish. Pushes the pawns up the board, sacrificing the a pawn. Doesn't worry too much about it. And look at that d3 pawn. It just keeps going up the board. Now e4 comes up to support it. This is going to be a really strong attack. White plays queen to e3, which is the first move that comes to mind for me, queen to e3. But Yasith just plays pawn to g5, just keeps pushing this pawn advantage, and there's nothing white can do. All of these pieces are tied down. So I kind of appreciate how deep this idea was of allowing queen takes a7 and coming back to e3, because look at all the expansion that black got, and now white is sitting very passively, and it's actually hard to push these queenside pawns. King f1, f5, a5, rook a8. So now white's got to figure out how do we keep these pawns defended. This is the weakest pawn on the board now, or at least on the queen side. So black can now use this as a target. Okay, all of these moves look pretty natural. Rook f3. Oh, queen c7. So after queen c7, now the h-pawn drops. Otherwise, white has to play queen g2, queen h2. Those moves are no fun. Queen c7, rook takes h3, c4. Now here, queen d8 was played. I think the clocks are getting a little bit low. The engine says queen e6 is much stronger because you want to keep this pawn guarded. Then we see rook h1 check, picking up the rook on the other side of the board. White makes a blunder here. Queen to g6 check was a little bit better, but black is still in really good shape. Rook takes c4, and now these pawns are dropping. There's nothing white can do. They all dropped. So now we're looking at 4 pawns to 1. And here we just have a couple more moves. Black is still up a rook, remember, so those pawns don't matter. Wins the queen. And delivers the checkmate. So I really like this game by Yasith. I think, in the opening, maybe looking into playing bishop to d6 first. That'd be one constructive takeaway. And then the other one would be knight takes d4. You can slow play this a little bit. Castle, queen b4, bishop f6, develop the rooks. White doesn't have any concrete plans here, so you can take your time winning that pawn back. Don't allow that quick queen to g4, which gives white the initiative. But once white missed that, I feel like the game was just completely in black's hands the whole time. Really nice game. So thanks, Yasith, for sharing it. Thanks you guys for watching. And again, make sure to check out yesterday's video, JD's recording on the Caro-Kann Exchange. I think you'll really find it instructive. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.